Yeah.
Hello.
I really like this place.
Good evening and welcome to this building. It's a cliche that buildings can be a TARDIS, but this is a TARDIS organisation. It is extraordinary what its output is. I'm privileged to chair it. My name is Paul Morrell, for those of you who don't know. Some years ago, the firm that I used to lead used to ask its staff one question a year, because what do you think about this? And one year we asked what made life worthwhile. And of course, I hoped that they would put that inspirational leadership was what made their life worthwhile. But actually what they put massively first, of course, was family. But then maybe rather surprisingly, the next one was nature. And I think that combination of family and nature, human nature, has a lot of lessons, I think, for the way that we live and the way that we work and the way we treat each other. And that's kind of the opening theme for tonight. And what better speakers could we have than, I guess, the briefest introduction I could give you is an actress, a garden designer, and a designer. And that tells you nothing, of course, about them, because the one thing they have in common is that they all have multiple and complex lives. And I'm only going to do the very briefest introduction to each of them. And I'll start with Dan, who was brought up in an arts and crafts house. His father was a painter and a teacher. His mother was a teacher of textiles and fashion. And so he sort of grew up with that atmosphere and then was inspired, so he says, by a garden pond. Wikipedia is to believe at least on that. And got a holiday job in gardening, and then went, rather than go through A-levels, went off as a trainee at Wisley. And set up his own business in 1987, and is now writing, lecturing, designing, and broadcasting his way around the world. Many of you probably read him in The Observer. And one book, in one of those nice happenstances, one book he co-wrote with Terence Conran, who by chance was a mentor to Thomas. Who I come on to. Thomas has been described as an ideas engine, and by Terence Conran as a Leonardo da Vinci of our time. No helicopter yet that I've seen, but of course the cauldron for the London Olympics gave us that fantastic moment when we thought we can do this, and the Paralympics. The prize-winning Seed Cathedral at the Shanghai Expo, and of course the redesigned Route Master bus. My local bus route has been Heatherwick, and I hope yours will too. And he pays his debts because a year ago when he asked me to help with the bridge, I said my fee for this will be you coming to speak at this event in a year's time, and here he is. And to continue the Conran theme, you were introduced to Thomas by Terence Conran. Joanna had this extraordinary idea, which we'll talk about in a moment when I finally shut up. A model, actress, author, campaigner. The first person I met born in Srinagar, I think, when her father was, of course, famously a decorated officer serving with the Gurkhas in the Indian Army. And, of course, you've seen this extraordinary program of campaigns that she's run since, including probably the finest ever spearing on television of a government minister. And Phil Wallace probably remembers the moment. She's seen the Northern Lights. She's been assessed as one of the 100 most powerful women in the United Kingdom. And she tells me she sleeps with maps, which I hope is something that you might explain. But it's about area development and what this bridge might do. And on that note, I'm going to shut up. It's going to be the idea. Thomas will go on to how he turned that idea into sort of 2 flower pots and 3 planks. And then Dan will talk about how we turned that into a garden. And I'm going to go one to the other. Joanna.
Thank you so much, Paul. Good evening. As Paul's mentioned, I was an army brat, and part of my young life was spent in Malaya. And if you will just be terribly indulgent and let me read you something. Malaya was terribly hot, and we lived at Kuala Lumpur, which was sort of really tropical, boiling hot and rain and sweaty every day. But in the holidays, we were allowed to go up to Fraser's Hill, which was a beautiful spiny centre with Cameron Highlands down the centre of what is now Malaysia, but was then called Malaya. And on the holidays there, everything was different. Everything was beautiful. You climbed up and up and up. And onto our arms, we'd put little cardigans, which we'd never worn before. And in the evenings, there were fires, which we'd virtually never seen before. It was unbelievably thrilling. my father, who was ADC to Gerald Templer, who was the High Commissioner out there, was lent the Governor's Lodge. And I just want to read you this in a book. No, out of print, honestly. But you'd find it in an Oxfam shop for a penny. But anyway, I wrote this in 1988, and I just thought it sums up quickly, because I do tend to waffle. Once we were lent the Governor's Lodge, which stood at the end of a road on a steep triangle of hill with vast views across the faraway villages and jungles. Early on the first morning, sleeping with a blanket and a real fire downstairs, and the house had an upstairs and a downstairs, and wood-panelled rooms. We got up and went out into the garden with cardigans on, an excitement in itself. What we saw was the most beautiful world I have ever seen. From the edge of the garden, where the ground sloped steeply, sharply down for 100 feet, were clouds nudging right up to the very flower beds and billowing away fat and clean and clear as far as the eye could see. The garden was drenched with dew. The sun sparkled in every drop, sighing and dripping from a tangle of scented roses and dahlias, runner beans and vines, zinnias and lantana, morning glory twining through every dense, moist, leafy, fruity thicket. Birds, unseen, screeched and chirped. Monkeys hooted and crashed below the clouds, and the morning sun was warm, and everything glittered and glinted and hissed with life. In the distance, treetops appeared above the clouds, making willow-pattern islands. The trees were enmeshed in spiders' webs and pitcher plants, all spangled with dew, and the garden itself was an island floating in a cloudy sea. Now, that's what I saw when I was 7. The impact has stayed with me. Almost as I was reading that, I could almost see and smell and hear it again. The idea of being somehow in a garden which was above the earth stuck with me. The clock races forwards like one of those cartoon films, pages in a Disney film, and I'm now up in London. Tragically, the Princess of Wales is killed, and people are talking about what sort of a monument we should have to remember her by, not just now and for our generation, but for generations to come. All kinds of ideas were coming up. And I had the idea suddenly of a garden, this flying garden, a garden flying. How does that happen? It's a bridge. I telephoned to Terence Conran, who I knew slightly, but enough to telephone. And I said, do you think this is an idea worth pursuing? And he said at once, I think it's brilliant. He said, I had an idea, I'm not even going to tell you what it is. Other people have had ideas, I'm not going to tell you what they were either. I'm going to help you with your idea. I shall back you. So the idea gathered strength. This was about 1998, 99. And I began to walk up and down the river in central London, because whenever you're doing something huge and daring, go straight to the middle. If you need something important done, go straight to the top. You can always come down, but if you're at the bottom, you can't usually go up. So start in the middle. The first place I thought of arrived on the south bank, where now the Great Wheel is, the Great Eye. So I realized that that wasn't going to work. So I continued to walk up and down the Thames like a stalker, with my camera, taking it like those dreary photographs that people take on holiday and glue them together and say, that's what we saw out the window. Well, you don't have to do that now, because we've now got cine cameras, but in the old days, that's what you did. And I took picture after picture after picture, because what was most important was that if there was going to be a new structure in the centre of London, this one at least would have courtesy to the people who lived and worked and owned buildings all around that area. Could this bridge in any way, and there was no design yet, have affronted people or blocked their view or upset them? And everywhere I looked, and I drew in biro on my photographs, would it hurt? No, it looks wonderful. Would it hurt from here? Always remembering St. Paul's Cathedral and the clear lines to that. The idea of the bridge was progressing, and I said to Terence, what do we do about building it? And he said, you have to get the best designer known to mankind, the finest designer money can buy. Well, money can't buy him, actually. He said Thomas Heatherwick. The idea by this time, Thomas hadn't designed the bridge. Thomas and I met. The idea was put forward into the competition of what should be the memorial for the Princess of Wales, and we were pipped to the post. We came second, and we came second to, hands up, who can remember? So there we are. Okay, I'm not going to jeer. You knew down there because you're very smart, I can tell that. But anyway, largely we can't remember, can't crawl to light what it was. So we were pipped to the post, so everything went into a carrier bag. But what had started and what was planted in my life was the seed of knowing Thomas Heatherwick, this extraordinary and brilliant boy. And so when, 10 years later, London had had the Olympics and had gained its courage, Thomas had flown into the stratosphere with his beautiful flames, his buses, his Shanghai pavilion. Times had changed again. And Thomas rang me this time and said, I think there's a chance that the bridge could go. Can I give you Thomas Heatherwick to carry on with the story?
We've never spoken on the stage before like this, so you can't really follow her. That's the problem. That's the downside of Joanna beginning. It was just very striking. I think it was 13 years ago. It was when heard Joanna's idea, and it just seemed you didn't need to see a design. It just seemed simple and powerful, and I'll sort of talk a little bit more about it. But it felt that the confidence in Britain had been a bit bruised by the perception that the projects like the Millennium Dome had sort of been a problem and not quite worked, and we ruin things, don't we, in Britain, despite the success that the Dome now has. But there was a sort of dent, and I think that when the Olympics happened, there was a sort of sense, that it's all going to go wrong again, and then the Olympics kind of didn't really go wrong, and was actually quite successful, and even won medals and things like that. And so it felt interesting that after the Olympics, there was a slight sense of, in my life, I'd never seen the people of this country just celebrating that we all live here together. And it was striking also, having been in a couple of other countries on their National Day, where you get people just celebrating that they all live in that country together. It's not anti another country. And then we did a little bit of research on National Days and found that of the 250 countries in the world, 3 of them don't have a National Day, and there's Denmark and another country and us. And it thought, oh no, we've got to wait 100 years till we get the Olympics again. If royal family, great, but it tends to only be if there's a royal birth or death or a war thing that brings us all out together. And so just felt there was an interesting space and sense of optimism existing after this games that had happened. And there was this idea, and a chance grew to maybe take that further. And so there's also London, the sort of clarity of London as not just special in Britain or Europe, but in the world, and the people who've chosen to base themselves in this city is really phenomenal. And my little studio has had chances to work in China and in North America and different places, and there's the importance of London as a place where within half an hour's cycle you've got the best people on the planet there around you. And so then we've got that bend in the river here. I'm sorry, I don't like laser pointers, and they had a bamboo stick here. So there was this bend in the river is sort of from the EastEnders kind of opening sequence. It really is the epicenter of one, if not the thought-leading capital in the world. And it was. I remembered that when I was studying, I went to a quite amazing series of discussions before the role of a mayor for London was asserted and created, and there were people worrying about the future of London, particularly worrying about the South Bank, and thinking, how are we going to breathe life into the South Bank? And there are all these master plans, and then if you look now at the South Bank and with the so this is Waterloo Bridge there in the middle, and we've got the London Eye and Tate Modern, and South Bank's really thriving, and kind of here we are, and amazing, all these elements coming together. And so we were just struck, there's the South London, the South Bank arts culture, and on the north with Covent Garden and Trafalgar Square and all of it, with the North London, the north side of the river, West End culture, and so our cultural heart spread across the city. But then there was the Victoria Embankment really splitting, this big dual carriageway that comes along here, dividing the north side of the river from the river itself, that we wouldn't be here without that river to start off with for this city. And then suddenly looking closer, realising that there's, when you go east from Somerset House on the north side, and when people have been worrying about the south, actually on the north, if you see a tourist wandering along Fleet Street or something coming along here, you kind of think, no, Covent Garden's that way, if they're wheeling their wheelie case. And yet this is incredible royal courts of justice, and then we've got this spine that goes from Buckingham Palace here to Trafalgar Square, along the Mall, along the Strand to the Aldwych, and then there's St Paul's Cathedral just along there. And but then roundabout when you get to the Aldwych, and even the word Aldwych sounds like someone's taken random letters from the alphabet and liquidized them, and it's a roundabout. And Trafalgar Square got de-roundabouted about a decade ago, and suddenly realised actually there's room to kind of reconnect us to the river, and to also maybe shine a little bit more light into that part of the city there. And so when sort of analysing this bend in the river that's sort of like the pivot point of London, there's Waterloo Bridge, famous with the Kinks song, and very much a bridge designed for cars, buses, taxis, lorries, motorbikes, and but no one, I don't know if anyone in here has said, but no one's ever asked me to meet them in the middle of Waterloo Bridge. And that's probably because it's a dual carriageway as well. In a thought-leading capital on this planet, and the views are stunning from a bus, and often buses it's used like a kind of bus park there. And so then when looking at, if you go to Paris and look at the Seine, which is 80, 90, 100 metres wide, and there's a sense of, when you stand on one side of the river, the proximity of the elevations of the buildings on the other side. If you then compare that to London, where our city is ripped apart by a quarter of a kilometre, up to 300 metres of this inland sea that comes through. Many people are able-bodied, but if you're not so able-bodied, you think twice before you walk quarter of a kilometre. And it sort of explained this powerful river has been a major obstacle historically, and that's why it's been seen, the sort of mindset has been, it's an obstacle to breach. You link across, you get across to the other side. And I was just very struck by the first conversation I had with Joanna, where she was saying, well, what if we didn't treat it as a thing to get across, but could it be a place rather than a link? And so then there was a chance for a real place, and it really chimed with us. And so there was Waterloo Bridge here. And I should also, just very quickly point out the rhythm of crossings here that you see over from the east coming through, and the bigger gap between Blackfriars and Waterloo as you continue down. And so there was the crescent of the Aldwych here, which is spectacular, and there is a business improvement district who are pursuing a project which has been, I think, to some extent inspired by the work that's come out of Joanna's idea, but looking at whether, rather than having there's a big roundabout, and it feels absurd thing that we have Buckingham Palace, you come along the Mall to Trafalgar Square, you then come along the Strand, and then you come into a big roundabout with Mary Le Strand Church stranded in the middle of the Strand with all the one-way traffic zooming around, which is, I don't know how many of you have been in there. It was amazing ceiling, but it's ridiculous to have this like that. And so there is some serious momentum to make a new major public space in London here, which is really exciting, and the crescent of the Aldwych be really reinforced with India House and where the World Service used to be broadcast from there. But then we look on to Arundel Street here, on the eastern side, and you come down, and it's certainly sort of felt slightly like a cul-de-sac as you come down, so the logic which seemed to make sense was to reinforce the crescent of the Aldwych and have something that's fantastic for things with wheels on, and then have something fantastic for things with legs on. And at the same time, I mean, London's got its particular grid and pattern and texture, which is so precious, and so many cities that are being created from scratch lack those quirks and things that were because of a funny well that was there 800 years ago and a weird land ownership. And one of the things that's lovely about the Millennium Bridge is when you stand on it and look at the St. Paul's, it feels like the Red Sea parted, because the buildings, there's this perfect line going to St. Paul's, and you sort of feel, surely there was always going to be something here. And so it was, when there was the chance for this site, it just thought like, this surely is a place for this idea. There was also this other funny thing that happened just a few weeks ago, but the Evening Standard were recalculating where's the centre of London. And the centre of London was calculated for years. I remember hearing that it was outside Charing Cross Station. And they kind of did all this measuring of London and suddenly went, ding, the centre of London is now a bench just here. And it was like, now that might be useful to trying to make this unusual project happen. And so welcome to the most central tube station in the thought-leading capital on the planet. And not that many people actually go there, really, unless they're maybe getting sued and going to see their lawyers in Temple, or suing. But there's this tube station where not many people, families who live in Amersham or something, jump on the Metropolitan line and think, oh, let's go into London for the weekend. Oh, what should we do? Well, let's go in and we'll go to Temple and figure it out. But it's very underused capacity, but it also has this space on top of the station. And most of the other tube stations near the Thames are set back, like Waterloo is set back. But this is right on the river, right next to the Victoria Embankment, but it offered the perfect chance to land across and get across the dual carriageway that's here, and be able to breathe life into a public space that currently has street drinkers, and various lewd things have been spotted by members of our team at various points, and then there's sort of an area with ripe for love. Around. On the south, the Coin Street community builders and Lambeth have been working with us and are part of the project, and have given us this piece of land that was about to something, it's been sort of pregnant with what should happen on it, in front of, just next to the big IBM building, the South Bank Television Centre, Prince's Wharf, Gabriel's Wharf, an area that's ready and so central, just happens to be on the south bit, and about to be ready for a next phase of its life. So the thing was that there seemed to be two reasons that it felt a right moment to try to make Joanna's idea, see if it was possible to happen. One was this slight optimistic vacuum after the Olympics, and the other was this project that happened in New York, which I guess, Joanna, your idea was about 16 years ago, I guess, and round about the same time in New York, there were some people who spotted an unused elevated railway line and thought you could put a garden up there. And it took them a decade to make that happen. and rallied together New York, and this was over in meat packing district and pretty run down, and it's absolutely sensational, and it's taken the creators by surprise, because I think to some extent there's a, who doesn't like plants and flowers? It's like good, like spray on flowers and plants, put them somewhere. But actually this is more than just a garden, a handy place to put a garden. How you feel floating above that New York that's being tough and scary, and it does something, and the interesting thing is it's not in the epicenter of New York. It doesn't go from anywhere to anywhere, and even because it's a historic structure, you have to go up in many places over the balustrade and down, so you're going upstairs, over and down to get onto it. But it's so special. And so the two things with the Olympics and this project seemed to allow us to speak to certain kinds of people who might have just given you a raised eyebrow look, but had a kind of, highline, and that's been fantastic. And they've been advising us and excited about our project too. And so that's been really useful, learning about that not a single handbag has been stolen from anyone. There's been no crime on it, which was astonishing. I guess it's because no one can, there's only your getaway is that way or that way. And interesting things like that. But Joanna's idea was to, which kind of felt very important to us in our studio when we were thinking, how do we manifest that, the two pots and a plank, neatly summed up concept. I'll hand over now. No, it was that this was a garden linking North and South London, not a bridge with some flower pots on. And so that was kind of really resonating in our minds. And we've worked with some property developers, shrewd characters that they are, and discussed projects which integrated nature. And before you know it, you're discussing wafer-thin hydroponic trickery with people misting foams with seeds on to get a sort of greenish look, or a deck. What we didn't want to do was do that, or do a deck with inserted flower pots. It felt the thing that is unique in Britain is this particular clammy, slightly mushroomy, musty, moist earthiness of mouldy leaves and worms, and that I miss when you go to a dry New York kind of smell. And so how do we make a proper garden? And the key seemed to be not trying to do trickery with soil like this, but proper soil to give the base to work with someone as extraordinary as Dan. But a garden, real proper soil is heavy. So 1,000 cubic meters of soil is wet soil is quite a weight. And we are allowed, the Harbour Master for London, Captain Terry Lawrence, gave us it was enthusiastic. The Port of London Authority have been working with us and gave us these two locations where we could put these river piers. And so it was, how do we take all of that load and apply it to those columns? And it was also clear that the hero of a garden bridge must be the garden and not the bridge. And we've got in our minds, there've been quite a few quite amazing modern bridges, and there's a sort of look with columns, white columns and stainless steel cables, and we were there thinking, oh, you can't have a tree with a sort of pseudo tree behind it, hiding, lurking with pseudo branches of stainless steel cables from the bridge shop. And it just felt our job was to somehow hold up a garden and get out of the way. And so that sort of led the engineering, and we've been working with over Arabs. And in a sense, it felt a bit like when there's guerrilla gardening and people sprinkling seeds where they're not supposed to, and these 20-meter deep foundations into the clay at the base of the river, and just taking those piles and just growing up and growing out of the riverbed 2 pots. And we didn't really want to find ourselves making piles, then a column, and then bits sitting on top of the column. Could there just be these two elements? And it means that it allows us to have 2 metre deep soil. In the closer to the column, the deeper the soil can be. And then when we're reaching out over the water, we can go to 0.5 metre soil. And that meant that over time, there's a possibility that the planting will echo the engineering, just because naturally slightly taller species will be more suited to the closer to the columns. And this, following that engineering, again, the closer to the column where we can carry the weight, and because there isn't a highways agency for how you walk, it felt we don't have to have this kind of relationship of this just parallel language that is channeling it all about getting to the other side. In fact, Joanna's idea was to be able to get people speedily from Waterloo Station across, or someone with their shopping bags managed to get to the Japanese film that's on at the British Film Institute, but also to have the slowest way to cross the river. And so we were just there realising that it allowed us to be as wide as Waterloo Bridge at the widest points, and that allowed us to have 4 different routes across the river. And that meant that we didn't have a single straight path sort of through the middle with a flower bed on the left and a flower bed on the right, and you're just standing looking at the building on the other side. Instead, as you walk in on each side, you're just looking at garden ahead of you. And it allowed us to meet the city narrow and just grow over the water and a little bit slimmer in the middle. I suppose a thing I should point out is that people like curves a lot in general, and sort of say, oh, get curves into things. But we were trying to think how we make places to hold you, and there's a big infrastructure scale, but how could we have a scale where a group of you with either your family or friends or something can huddle? And Joanna had been talking about where you could have a tryst or propose to someone, or how could we make that scale instead of just having a big sweeping handrail encouraging you're supposed to zoom off. And so we needed radial fins. The structure needed all these ribs coming around. So a bit like a Terry's chocolate orange. We were imagining sort of like these slices of a cake, that we could just allow each one of these ribs to make a series of places. And the way, this is a bit inappropriate, but it was the only way we could think about it. And actually, I've never seen this film, and it's maybe a bit cheesy, but and it's inappropriate, obviously, because the ship sank. But there was the world's biggest ship at that time, so the massive scale. But there was an intimate point where people could be together, and it seemed the challenge with this project that a real garden. This isn't a park. Joanna's vision was a garden. Was how we have that scale that isn't about the massive frisbees and kicking a football around, but instead the intensity and richness. And so, in effect, the project is just 2 planters that come out from the river. And in terms of the materials of it, the South Bank is so much in our minds. The kind of cartoon that leaps into your head is of concrete. The cartoon that leaps into your head of the North Bank is brick and stone. And it was just feeling, well, how can we not be allied to one side or the other, but allow something to sit at ease between those? And we're thinking, also, how can we be warm? We do actually need quite a lot of concrete so that a ship can whack this and it not go over. But concrete just didn't feel as experientially something we wanted to have there greying over time. And we found, working with the engineers, they found this metal that was very exciting, because we didn't want something that needs another coat of paint or little bits of stone have dropped off. And there's this metal called copper nickel that is used in the offshore oil rig industry and used for making some of these large propellers, which is an alloy of copper and nickel, and has this warmth, but also doesn't go very dark brown over time, like some of the bronzes, which become really heavy, because we want the underside to be beautiful to walk under or to be on a boat on the river underneath. And so that was something exciting. So the project is is just these two planters, as Paul said. The thing that we are excited to try to achieve really is that the London Eye costs £14.50 to go on, I think, last time we looked, and the Shard is amazing, Icon of London, £24.50 if you book in advance on the internet. And we really want something like this to be free if we can. And so that was hence when we had the chance to really take this to the next level, this setting up of a charitable trust that Paul is the deputy chair of. And the key really in the design of it is creating the intimate scale. So there's a citywide 300-metre scale, but within that are a series of many smaller gardens and smaller places. And our hope is to not have the garden bridge bench and there's 40 of the same bench, but instead have 40 different places. And I think, well, Dan will talk about the plants, but we were so excited that Dan said yes. These are some a little bit old images, but really to talk about the experiences you walk on as the garden grows, as you walk onto it. And then these particular places which you can peel off from the main routes and sit and knit all day or whatever. And that success with the project might be that someone went on and spent the day and left and never went to the other side at all. So
no, we can't have too many of those, Thomas, because they'll clog it up.
Okay.
They will. We
So that's my last
encourage them.
image.
I think sort of, half an hour's lovely, darling. A couple of cigarettes.
So Joanna's going to be going along with a cigarette, kicking them off. Over to you.
So I've lived in South London for over 20 years now. And my favourite bridge whenever I went north was Waterloo Bridge for these extraordinary views from either side. And I was always really happy for living south of the river because you got that amazing experience. And I always felt how brilliant it was to be where we are now and to make that journey. And when Thomas and Joanna explained the principle of this place, that would be somewhere you could linger and somewhere that you would want to stop and somewhere that would provide this sense of oasis in the centre of the city, it was too much of a good opportunity to turn down. It's a tremendously exciting project, as you can see. But we felt that it was very important because we've got this length of crossing, which is 300 metres or more or less, that we've got this opportunity to tell a story which allows you this complete immersion once you leave the shore and go into this world, which is a world in itself, on your way to the other shore. So I started looking at the different qualities between the south of the river situation and the north of the river situation. And the South Bank is a young part of London. Until fairly recently, the hubbub and the excitement of the theatres and all those things which exist down here were very recently osier beds and nurseries. Look at just not so far from here, Lower Marsh, Upper Marsh, all those street names which give away what this piece of land that we're sitting on now would have been like. So I wanted there to be some reference really to the fact that this was a young part of London. This was somewhere that was newly colonised. And in contrast, and Mr. Curtis, who was responsible for setting up the Chelsea Physic Garden, actually made a botanic garden down here, not so far from this site that we're going to be working on. And so there were these very nice hooks that we could get into in terms of creating a sense of journey from one space to the next. Look at the North Bank, and you've got a much older part of London that has an embedded history that goes right the way back. In this part where we touch down on the North Bank at Temple Station, to the Knights Templar who established a space there in the 12th century. It's a place which had been cultivated for a long time by the time we started looking at it. It was somewhere where the RHS in the 1800s made their first flower shows before they took it to the Chelsea Flower Show, and where William Robinson, the great naturalist and plantsman, dabbled in this space. So we felt that there was a rich history which was more to do with an ornamental horticulture and a history of growing things that existed on this north bank. And that gave us this opportunity to create a narrative that would allow us to create a series of spaces that you moved through 5 different chapters from north to south or south to north, depending on which way you were walking. So we looked at there being a pioneer area on the south bank that took that idea of the osier beds and the young London, going right the way through to a space on the left which felt like it was much more connected to old London. These spaces really are identified by the way that the bridge is built. As you come up off the south bank, you step up onto a terrace which then leads you up into an open space just above those, or in amongst those plane trees which are on the south bank. And as you step out into that space, we wanted the environment to have a sense of that pioneer landscape which used to be very close by. If you read Pepys's diaries, he walked through water meadows and osier beds to get down to Greenwich. And we wanted that first part of the bridge, the first chapter, to have a sense of that. So we're going to use pioneer plants, things which we might use for coppicing, like willows and alders, things which will cope with the conditions on the bridge. Go out onto the bridge and you'll find that the wind blows more strongly. Now, we're not seeing this as being a negative challenge, we're seeing it as being a positive one, because the wind can be a wonderful thing. But we need to choose things which are going to be appropriate to that environment. So the first part, we want to introduce that idea that this is a dynamic landscape which is going to be changing. If you think about our wonderful green spaces in London, most of them are parks, and they tend to be very static. You have a green sward, which some places is left to grow long. You have trees with shadow and areas to play. But they're spaces which don't change enormously apart from the obvious changes which we get from spring through summer into the autumn and winter. But we want this to be a garden. We want it to be a space which is gardened and which is dynamic for that. So building in change is a really important part of why that place works. So we're looking at there being plants which have this feeling of having leapt onto the bridge from somewhere wilder, things which may have been introduced in the past on those wonderful journeys that were made out along the Thames into the world to collect things and bring them back along to Kew. We want to use wild plants alongside cultivated things and to use things which feel like they've got the upper hand in a way in terms of the horticulture. The second space we move into is an area that we're calling the Wild Glade. Now, Thomas described these 2 feet which go down into the riverbed. And what the feet do is allow us this opportunity of up to 2 meters depth of soil, where we can then support 2 proper woodlands. So you move between these woodlands. So the planters, which Paul described, and the planks, we're now in one of the planters. And this first Wild Glade incorporates some of the things which we have seen in the first part. And we start to then look at trees which might have a longer life, which might be something that grows into position over a much longer period and becomes a loved tree that your children might have grown up with. And here you can see one of those glades with its cross paths through it, illustrating how this isn't just simply an island, it's a space that you can occupy as you move into the bridge. It's a space that meets you as you walk up the path onto the bridge from the pioneer space into a small woodland, which then blocks your view of the other side of the river and allows you to very quickly get mingled and lost in this inner world of the first glade. We see them as being really very special spaces which have an atmosphere all of their own. And we're starting to introduce slightly more ornamental plants here, so there'll be a slight weighting of ornamental things mixing with these wild plants. And we want the bridge to be somewhere that is working for every single day of the year. Joanna described it as being one of the slowest places to make your way across the river. And we want there to be places which people can ponder, whether they're there in April, June, December, or November, and for there always to be something different happening. A good garden will provide you with a series of moments which are distinct in themselves and allow you to be in that place, in that particular moment, and for it never to be repeated. And we want this garden to provide those places for people so that when they go there, they know that they're going to something which can transport them, take them away from the hubbub of London and into this magical world of things that grow. So we're seeing these opportunities, really, of these different chapters as a way of us allowing us to unravel a story which is connected, but allows these different moods to take place as you move out into the centre of the bridge. And this central place is the teetering point. It's where the soil depths get their thinnest, and we've managed to get up to 400 mil, about like that. So we know we can grow things, but it means that the trees peter out, and what you get as you get into the centre is this opportunity of looking out. So we looked at environments which might be reminiscent of that perching space that you'll meet when you get to the centre of the river. And we've called this the scarp. And I think it really helps when you're designing something to identify a place that you feel you can see in your mind when you're making the plant selection. And I had to think about an environment which might be windy, which might be several degrees cooler than on the shore, which might be more exposed in terms of sun, which will be drier as a consequence. So you can look at clifftop environments, you can look at those high points on the edge of estuaries where there's still wind. You can look to Mediterranean environments where there are plants which are totally adapted to those places, which do well despite the conditions. So we're choosing things which really are adapted to that place. And as you move into the centre of the bridge, the leafy glades on either side will be replaced with arbutus, strawberry tree, and pines, which will capture that wind in the needles, so you get that wonderful hiss as the wind moves through it, and grasses and plants which harness the wind in their motion, so that you start to get that lovely feeling as you're walking over the water and out into the light. And then we move back down into the cultivated glade, where we see the influence of North London manifesting itself in trees which will have been imported from other parts of the world, liquid ambers for their amazing autumn colour, and special crab trees brought from China with beautiful glistening berries and this magnificent moment in the spring. We want there to be highlights on the bridge, so you can say, let's go for blossom season, let's go and look at the autumn colour, let's go and look at the berries. We also want this to be an environment which is connecting a corridor of greenery for wildlife to use it as well as people, so that you can go there to look at the butterflies and the bees and the birds which will flock to this place as well. So this is a little diagram just to show you how we're looking at the matrix of plants. And it's like a weave, it's like a textile of things, where there will be layers with trees providing shadowy canopies and dappled light at your feet, with shrubs to form a mid-layer, and then going down to perennials, which you can see here in these little beaded diagrams, that merge and grow in and out of each other and allow this layering to continually take place throughout the year. You can see here one of these crossing points through the glades. Each glade is up to 11 metres wide at its longest point and 67 metres long, so they're proper spaces you can get less lost in. And as Thomas was saying, we'll have benches which will be specific to those places. We'll have water bowls for the birds to come down and take in the water and bring the sky down into the watery surface. And we'll have spaces which feel distinct, so that you know you can go there for a particular colour that you love, or for something which will be kicking off at any particular moment. So this is looking at a weighting of ornamental plants which will tip the balance from the wild plants which were in the first glade and the Pioneer section. And then that leads us through, down out through the last plank onto Temple rooftop. And there's a little garden alongside Temple Station, which is already established, which we'll borrow in terms of connecting us out to that piece of greenery. And we'll use things that the Knight Templars will have brought back, like figs and roses, possibly even a pomegranate if we can find a space in which to grow it. So this environment leads us down into the leafy old part of London, and where we might have wild hawthorn growing as a multi-stemmed tree on the south shore. Here we might have clipped that hawthorn into a shape which is reminiscent of ornamental topiary. So we're controlling something that was wild at the other end and playing with that idea of the garden changing as it goes through each of its chapters. And here we have the mix of plants, quite exotic things at this time. We've got things like winter sweet for that wonderful bite of sugary perfume in February. We've got things with berries. We've got things which have their high point in the summer, and something for every season. This is very important. One of the things that we've had to consider very, very carefully is how we frame London. And this is an exercise which we've considered with historic views from one space to the next, making sure that they're uninterrupted, so that we've got these gaps between the planting, which are very, very key. But it's also as important for us to be framing London from the bridge. Go out on one of the open bridges that Thomas was talking about earlier, and you can see everything all in one go. And one of the magic things about a garden is that it reveals the world to you in a series of different ways. So we can use a slot between two trees to focus a view. We can retain a gentle, shimmery view through from one space to the next, so you get these gentle connections. And these images, which we've seen already, show us how we are making sure that we connect a view of St. Paul's from Waterloo Bridge, how we're getting views of Somerset House out from the bridge, and various key things which are important. And these spaces show those framed views and the places that we want to occupy and get people to dwell in, to be part of that environment when they're in the bridge and lingering there. Lastly, I just wanted to show you how we're having to think about the trees. It's very important that we think about choosing plant material which is adapted to this place, and we've got to think very carefully about how we select trees which will have been grown and plants which will have been grown in a cosseted environment of a nursery. Think about what that word means. And then brought into this exposed situation with the limitations that come with it. So we're thinking of using multi-stemmed trees, which will be a nurse crop to slower growing things. And for these treescapes to harbour a series of environments which will be created over time and allow the bridge to have this dynamic change built into it. And I'm just going to finish with a few images of this one cross-section through the bridge, showing first and foremost these nurse trees growing up. If you look at the tree in the middle, the little one, just go back, it's tiny at that point, being sheltered by faster growing things like alders on either side, that eventually will be trimmed away and allow the slower growing things to take more of a foreground, to become more important as time goes on. So we're seeing this landscape of the bridge changing and evolving and being something which is always offering each generation something which they can look forward to and feel part of and be proud of. And we're incredibly excited to be doing this in the very centre of London. So thank you.
And finally, really, as I say, what a fantastic gang to be a part of, and beautifully done, all three of you. Many, many thanks.